Rob, I think just by reading social media the past week or so, what's made it more special is just some of these sort of extraordinary stories. The likes of Manyonga, the rowing guy, Britain, Castor, of course, and Wayne van Niekerk, overcoming huge odds to get to the podium.
Yeah, you're quite right, and I think those are the sort of instances we actually need to desperately clutch at the moment. They're big sort of they're big reflections of the sort of pride that drives South African sport. Remind us that actually, we are capable of sort of great things. We've got so much sort of mediocrity at the moment in so many of our sort of pride and joy team sports that these individuals, especially the ones who've sort of had to fight odds, and you don't want to go on too much about the old cliches of poverty and coming from gang-infested areas and the lure of drugs, etc. Yet, as you say, they are quite relevant in the case of certain athletes. Castor Semenya, for instance, we know has fights battles entirely of her own, of a different kind, of a raging sort of scientific war, if you like, and no guarantee that she's going to sort of keep her crown, because we know that there is still pressure over this whole excessive testosterone issue that's going to rage and rage. It's not necessarily going to go away. We know there are strong feelings in the athletic world around it. We know that some of her opponents are pretty icy towards her. Sadly, we saw that again in that final, where I think a lot of South Africans would have been very not only proud of her naturally because of what the circumstances that she has to go through, but also the dignity with which she actually went about things. I saw Ryk Neertling tweeting that although she looked cool and calm, he said, make no mistake, there would have been a lot of issues raging in her head going into that final. So a lot of character and guts shown. And for all the controversy, and I'm not saying that there's necessarily a clear-cut line on this. There's no right and there's no wrong. I still think that this issue is going to bubble for a lot longer and must be allowed to. It's a debate that does have merits both ways. So we mustn't forget that. But at the end, it ended up being a bit of a feel-good story as things stand. She was allowed to race. She ran on merit, and despite a pretty desperate challenge from one or two of her opponents, actually delivered the goods really, really well in the final. So yes, as Garen said, the Olympics has given South African sport as a whole just a much more of a sort of positive vibe for the next few weeks. We've got to try to keep that going from here on in.
I mean, Garen, as South Africans, we don't want to harp on this issue, but I mean, have we seen the end of the Castor saga? I mean, the IAAF, SANAC, they're still pressing this issue. We've seen some reports coming out sort of post-race about this Briton, Leslie Sharp, saying how difficult it is to compete against Castor. Ironically, she came sixth, so if Castor didn't compete, she would have come fifth. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, look, it's definitely not over, not by a long shot. There's a lot of unhappiness out there. I think social media after the race went into overdrive. Every South African sort of in the pro-Castor camp, the rest of the world, pretty much anti-Castor. And I think the key here is, if you take all the emotion out of it, all the South Africans, if you just take Castor in isolation, pretend she wasn't a South African, and you look at it in isolation, she clearly has an advantage. That's not up for debate. Her times were far, far lower and quicker when she was when she's allowed to be not take any medication for this testosterone levels that she has. When she was forced by the IAAF to do so back in sort of 2009, 2010, her times were far, far slower. She wouldn't even have reached the final, I don't think, certainly wouldn't have won the gold medal. So it is a very, very tricky situation that they find themselves in. It's a case of Sebco, he's on a bit of a mission to prove that she has got an advantage. She clearly has got an advantage looking at the times. How they go about fixing it, I'm not quite sure. I think that's the key. It's not Castor's fault. Nobody's blaming her for being born the way she was born. I think it's just a case of this high level of testosterone has given her an advantage. Whether she needs to lower that level to a decided upon sort of level that gives her not as much of an advantage. Perhaps that's the way they go. That's what they used to do a couple of years ago. She wasn't sort of breaking world records or coming close at that stage. Actually quite surprised that she didn't break the world record. She clearly could have broken the world record. She ran the fastest time, her fastest time ever, a new South African record. She was only 2 seconds away from the record. She didn't look tired at all at the end. She could have gone plenty seconds faster. I think it's a good thing that she didn't break it. I think if she had smashed that record by 2-3 seconds, everyone would have gone like, okay, clearly is an advantage because
Yeah.
you've come from nowhere to have broken this record that's stood for 30 odd years.